I think he died recently. He and there's a number of reports you can find on the internet that there was a bomb on the plane. Well, so let's ask the question, what happened? And there are people who answered that question saying there was a bomb on the plane. The NTSB report shows that all of the electronics were functioning on impact. If you have a light bulb and it's turned off and you break it, it looks differently than if it's turned on and you break it. And so they can tell whether the lights were on because the bulbs, the word they use is stressed. Everybody following that? So they could tell that all the electronics were on. I've seen stuff on the internet that said, oh, they sent some kind of a special particle beam, whatnot, and killed the electronics. The NTSB report says no. The NTSB report says there was no evidence of a fire or any sort of physical damage. There's absolutely nothing in the NTSB report to indicate what put that plane into the water. The debris was recovered in a relatively tight pattern. It would have been spread across miles if the plane had been blown up in the air. In addition to which, there's reports from citizens on the beach who recovered the luggage, saying that the luggage was intact. And given the way that the plane went straight down, that would suggest that the bomb, if there was one, would have been in the tail of the plane. But when I encounter this argument, what I say to people is that the Warren Commission report and documents are just, it's a gold mine of evidence that Kennedy was killed by a conspiracy. The 9/11 report has the Mineta testimony right in it, right? It's a gold mine of killer stuff. And the NTSB report has nothing, right? I spent a couple of years studying it. It has nothing in it to suggest that there was a bomb. So what the hell's going on? This is the radar report of the final seconds of the plane, the final minute, I guess, minute and a half. Descending, and then he contacts the tower, and about a minute after he contacts the tower, the plane went straight down into the water. Well, if the moon was out, the manager at the Martha's Vineyard Airport said the moon was out. It was not hazy. Kennedy didn't get lost. He had a very sophisticated autopilot. The previous owner of the plane says that the autopilot on that plane, at the push of a button, the plane would take you to your location, to the runway of the airport, if you put in the coordinates, which you would do at the start of the flight. How do you explain this? And I don't think it's too much to suggest that if you're in a plane that's doing fine in clear weather with good sound avionics and it does this, you committed suicide. And please feel free to argue and point something out that I've missed, but that looks like a suicide to me. And this is the thing that gave me fits for a long time. I'm page 350, right? I'm going through this thing with a fine-tooth comb, and I've gotten to page 350 without finding anything to answer the question of what put that plane into the water. And I find that the fuel valve was in the off position. And I'm just ripping my hair out. What the hell does that mean? And I'm calling up everybody I know, and I got out the yellow pages, and I called up every flight instructor in the Los Angeles yellow pages, and that's quite a number. And any of them that would talk, we're talking about this. And what do you think? What do you think? And I'm not sure what so let's talk about the fuel valve for a second. That is the fuel valve. Well, I'm sorry, it is the fuel valve from the Piper Saratoga. Right tank, left tank. In order to keep the plane balanced, you move this back and forth. This is a keeper. This is, that's an idiot button that will prevent you from accidentally moving the switch all the way over to off. You need two hands. You need to push that button with one hand while you move the lever with the other in order for the lever to get into the off position. How the hell did the lever get into the off position? It's crazy. It could not possibly have happened by accident. John turned the fuel valve off before he committed suicide. It doesn't make any sense. So I'm talking to one of these flight instructors, and he tells me, well, it is very strange, but strange things will happen. The pilot on Egypt Air 990 turned the fuel valve off. This guy tells me. And I said, what? And he said, yeah. You guys familiar with Egypt Air 990? This guy walks into the cockpit and he says something about Allah help me, or he invokes the standard, not suicidal and not maniacal, just a standard thing that you might say when you're encountering a difficult task, invoking the name of Allah and asking for His help. The guy's name is Camille Batuti, and he grabs the steering yoke and pushes it forward, and I've heard different reports, but what I thought I read from the NTSB was that the cockpit voice recorders recorded a struggle in the cockpit, and in any case, what the flight instructor who I was speaking with, who told me the whole story, tells me, is that 5 pilots grab him and rip him away from the controls, and then they're struggling to recover the plane. And while they're struggling to recover the plane, this sneaky devil reaches over and turns off the fuel control valve, and the engines die, and the plane goes straight into the water.
Wasn't he part of the flight crew?
I'm sorry?
Was he not part of the flight crew?
Oh, he was part of the flight crew. But he wasn't the part of the flight crew assigned to plunge the plane into the water. 50 miles from where John Kennedy Jr.'s plane went down, 100 days after John Kennedy Jr.'s plane went down. Now, I don't want to make too much out of that, but I want you to make sure you hear it, that very much in a similar time and place. But the point is that if closing the fuel valve means suicide, we now have 2 really major pieces of evidence that indicate that somebody on that plane committed suicide. In the interest of time, I'm going to just... But what do you make of that? John Kennedy Jr. committed suicide. John Kennedy Jr. had a staff meeting that day, and there were small financial difficulties with the newspaper. The guy's a millionaire. Not serious financial problems. And he told his staff, "Don't worry," he said, "as long as I'm alive, you will have a job this magazine will publish." And then he went out and committed suicide. Any number of witnesses to say that John was extremely upbeat and enthusiastic, and that he was planning to have kids. A Canadian businessman whose name escapes me at the moment says that John was talking as though his wife were pregnant.
John, to clarify, I think you said two famous people on that plane committed suicide. Did you mean to say that?
Did I say that?
I think you said somebody on that plane.
Somebody on that plane committed suicide.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
The question is who? And how the hell can we answer that question? Well, keep pushing. I mean, that's all I ever did was say, well, now what? Well, keep pushing. Carol Radziwill, the Coast Guard called her Radiwell, and for 5.5 years, that's what I thought her name was. And then she was on Oprah, and she published the book, and I found out the actual name of the person who called the Coast Guard. She was the best friend. She spoke with Carolyn minutes before the plane took off. They were supposed to have dinner. At 2:15, she called the Coast Guard, and she said that there was a flight instructor on the plane. Now, if anybody were going to be in a position to know the truth of that, I think she's it. However, she's not all of it. Richard Blow was John's editor at George Magazine, his closest business associate. He published a book called America's Son about his relationship with John Kennedy, and in that book, he discussed the fact that the day of the plane crash, John had had the cast taken off his foot. He was flying this little lighter-than-air, like an airborne go-kart, 3 months before, and he hit a tree and it broke his foot, and so he had the cast on. It had just been taken off that day, so he's still on crutches, and he says he went to lunch with John, and that he noticed on the way back, John talked about the fact that let's read it. "I'm flying to Hyannisport for my cousin Rory's wedding," he said. "I glanced at John's foot. Even the short walk from the restaurant back to the office had tired him, then gave him a skeptical look. 'Don't worry,' he said. 'I'm flying with a flight instructor, with an instructor. Just don't crash, okay?'" So we have the 2 closest people to John and his wife have both said that there was a flight instructor on the plane. At 7 o'clock in the morning, when I heard that John Kennedy's plane was missing, I heard that there was a flight instructor on the plane. But when I got home from the restaurant and went to bed and opened the paper the next day to read all about it, there was no mention of a flight instructor. And I'm thinking, am I out of my mind? What happened? I mean, there's no mention that originally it was reported that there was a flight instructor, but we found out later, based on something, that there was none. There was no mention of it. It was ignored. Where is the flight instructor? Okay, this is a good question, I think. John told Richard Blow that he was flying with a flight instructor. Well, now one of 3 things is true. John was lying. Richard Blow was lying, or John had an appointment to fly with a flight instructor, right? I mean, his plane was supposed to take off in like 2 hours. You don't make that statement unless you have an appointment with a flight instructor. John had an appointment. Come on, he's a professional person. He had an appointment with a flight instructor. Where is the flight instructor with whom John had an appointment that he did not keep? That person is missing. Other reasons to think that there was a flight instructor on that plane. 1, John never flew the plane without a flight instructor. That's a pretty good reason, right? That's some pretty solid evidence to think that there was a flight instructor on that plane. If you didn't have anything else, that would be very solid evidence to think that there was a flight instructor on the plane. 2, this was a new plane. It had all this fancy aeronautics on it. I mean, my favorite example is that you have a computer. It's got Windows on it. Yeah, what do you know about operating Windows? Enough to make the programs that you want to work, but you know that there's a world of stuff that you don't know about. Well, John's plane was that way, except that he wanted to know how to use all of the bells and whistles, and because they're all safety features, right? And if you're a good, cautious pilot, which every single one of John's flight instructors emphatically said that he was a very cautious pilot, you want to know. So you have a flight instructor, and while you're flying, he shows you the next thing that you don't know about. Jay Biederman, the main instructor at that time, John went through a series over the course of, I think, 20 years of flying.